The floorboards beneath Sarah McKenzie's feet groaned like dying animals as she held the anonymous note with trembling fingers. Outside her window, the Montana Territory wind howled through the gaps in the weathered walls, carrying with it the acrid smell of coal smoke and something else. Something that made her stomach twist with dread. The children are under the church. I can't say more, they'll kill my child. The words seemed to burn themselves into her vision as she read them for the fourth time. Sarah's mind flashed to her mother's study back in Boston, where Margaret McKenzie had spent countless nights writing articles about women's suffrage and social justice. The memory came flooding back, her mother's voice, steady and determined, as she worked by lamplight. The pen is mightier than the sword, my dear. But remember, some truths are worth dying for. When you find those truths, you must have the courage to tell them, no matter the cost. Sarah clutched the note against her chest, feeling the rapid drumming of her pulse. Through the grimy window pane, she caught a glimpse of a cloaked figure vanishing down the creaking stairs, leaving behind a trail of fresh mud that seemed to point accusingly toward her door. The woman moved with desperate haste, her footsteps echoing briefly in the stairwell, before the hotel's front door slammed shut with bone-jarring finality. As the sound reverberated through the thin walls, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. There on her doorstep lay a small wooden cross, crudely carved but unmistakably deliberate. The wood was still warm to the touch, as if it had been clutched in someone's hand moments before. Someone wanted her to know she was being watched. 20 years old and barely 5 feet tall, Sarah had learned to use her youthful appearance as both shield and weapon in the masculine world of journalism. But here in this godforsaken frontier town, she felt every inch the terrified girl that people mistook her for. The isolation was complete. No telegraph lines reached this remote corner of the Montana Territory, no regular mail service, no way to summon help if things went wrong. A sudden crash from the alley below sent her scrambling away from the window. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the night, followed by the deliberate scrape of boots on wooden planks. Someone was moving through the darkness with purpose, and Sarah had the sinking feeling that purpose involved her. Her hand moved instinctively to the small derringer her mother had insisted she carry, a weapon that had belonged to her grandmother during the war. The gun felt impossibly small in her palm, but its weight was reassuring. Margaret McKenzie had pressed it into Sarah's hands the night before she left Boston, along with a warning that still echoed in her mind. Trust no one completely, my dear. Even good men can be corrupted by power, and evil men often wear the masks of saints. The footsteps in the hallway stopped directly outside her door. Sarah held her breath, counting the seconds, as the doorknob turned slightly, just enough to test whether it was locked. The brass handle moved with deliberate slowness, as if the person on the other side wanted her to know they were there. When the footsteps finally retreated, Sarah waited a full minute before creeping to the door. A second wooden cross had been slipped underneath this one, smaller than the first, but carved with more intricate detail. Together, the crosses formed a pattern she didn't recognize, some kind of religious symbol, but twisted, corrupted somehow. The message was clear. Someone was marking her, claiming her for purposes she couldn't yet understand. As dawn broke over the jagged peaks surrounding Deadwood Junction, Sarah sat fully dressed at the room's single wooden chair, the two crosses arranged on the table before her like components of a twisted altar. She had come to this remote Montana Territory outpost in September 1870 to write about frontier education, drawn by a letter from something called the Western Education Foundation that had praised her previous work on immigrant children in Boston. The letter had been beautifully written, full of flowery language about the noble work of bringing civilization to the frontier. It had mentioned her specifically by name, referencing articles she had written for the Boston Herald about the challenges facing immigrant families. The foundation had even included a modest travel allowance, enough to cover her train fare and accommodations for a 2-week stay. But now, staring at the note and the crosses, Sarah realized she might have walked into something far more sinister than a simple story about frontier schools. The timing of her arrival, the anonymous note, the carefully placed crosses, it all felt orchestrated, as if someone had been planning her visit long before she'd made the decision to come. She pulled out her notebook and began writing, documenting everything she had observed since arriving in Deadwood Junction 3 days ago. The absence of children on the streets, the nervous glances from shopkeepers when she asked about local families, the way conversation stopped when she entered a room, the hotel clerk's sudden reluctance to discuss the town's history when she'd asked about the church's construction. The main street of Deadwood Junction stretched before her like a wound across the Montana landscape. The town had the desperate, clinging-to-life appearance of a place built too quickly and too far from civilization. The recent completion of the Northern Pacific Railroad had brought a flood of miners, railroad workers, and opportunists, creating a powder keg of competing interests and lawless ambition. Sarah had studied the town's history before making the journey west. Deadwood Junction had been established just 5 years earlier as a supply depot for the copper mines that honeycomb the surrounding mountains. The initial boom had brought nearly 1,000 residents, but a series of mine collapses and labor disputes had driven many away. Now the town clung to life, with a population of barely 400 souls, most of them men who had nowhere else to go. The architecture told the story of boom and bust. Grand buildings with elaborate facades stood next to ramshackle structures that looked ready to collapse at the first strong wind. The Palace Hotel, with its imported chandeliers and marble floors, sat directly across from Murphy's Saloon, where the sawdust on the floor was changed weekly, whether it needed it or not. But it was the church that dominated the landscape, St. Augustine's Catholic Church, rising from the dusty ground like a monument to faith and determination. The building was an architectural marvel for such a remote location, built from local stone quarried from the mountains and fitted with stained glass windows that must have cost a fortune to transport from the east. Sarah had noticed the absence of children immediately upon her arrival. For a town of nearly 400 souls, the streets were eerily quiet of young voices. When she'd asked the hotel clerk about it, he'd mumbled something about better opportunities elsewhere, and quickly changed the subject. The few children she had glimpsed were always in the company of adults, never playing freely in the streets, as one might expect in a frontier town. The sheriff's office occupied a narrow building between Murphy's Saloon and a barber shop that doubled as the town's unofficial medical clinic. The building was newer than most, constructed from milled lumber that had been painted recently. A sign outside advertised, "Tom Bradley Sheriff, Justice for All." But the words had been weathered by Montana's harsh climate until they were barely legible. Sarah pushed through the door, setting a small bell to jingling, and found herself face to face with Sheriff Tom Bradley. He was a man in his early 40s, with the weathered features and careful manner of someone who had spent years walking the thin line between law and chaos. His desk was covered with wanted posters and territorial dispatches, and a well-maintained Winchester rifle rested within easy reach. "Miss McKenzie." Bradley set his weathered face creasing into what might have been a smile. His accent carried the distinctive drawl of Texas, and his manner suggested a man who had seen enough violence to appreciate peace. "Reckon you're here about them school questions." "That's right, Sheriff. I'm hoping you can help me understand how the community supports its children's education." Sarah pulled out her notebook, making a show of preparing to take notes, while she studied the man across from her. Bradley's expression grew careful, and Sarah caught the quick glance he shot toward the church, visible through his window. "Well, now you've come to the right place. Father Miguel's done more for our young'uns than anyone in the territory. Set up programs to get 'em proper schooling back east." "That's wonderful. How many children have participated in these programs?" "Oh, I'd say a dozen or so over the past year. Good families, mind you, folks who wanted the best for their children." Bradley's voice carried rehearsed notes, as if he'd given this speech before. "Of course, with the Cheyenne troubles we've been having, some families decided to relocate for safety." Sarah's pulse quickened. Her research had indicated that the Cheyenne in this region had maintained peaceful relations with the territorial government for several years. "What kind of troubles, Sheriff?" Bradley's eyes narrowed and Sarah caught a flash of something that might have been warning. "Nothing for a lady reporter to fret about. Just frontier life. But I'd appreciate it if you didn't go spreading tales about Indian raids. Bad for business, if you catch my meaning. Of course. But I'm curious, when did these troubles begin? Started up about a year ago. Coincided with some of the mining disputes, if you want the truth. Miners go on strike, claim they ain't getting paid fair wages. Next thing you know, supplies start going missing, livestock disappears. Easy enough to blame it on the Indians." Sarah made notes, but her mind was racing. A year ago, roughly the same time, children had started disappearing from the school rolls. Have there been any actual attacks? Any injuries? Bradley shifted uncomfortably. "Well, no. Not what you'd call attacks exactly. More like harassment, theft, that sort of thing." "I see. And these mining disputes, are they ongoing?" "Settled mostly. Father Miguel helped mediate between the mine owners and the workers. Man's got a gift for bringing people together, finding common ground." Bradley's voice warmed considerably when he spoke of the priest. "Course, that's just one of the ways he's helped this community. The work he's done with the children, getting them opportunities they never would have had otherwise, that's the real miracle." As Sarah left the sheriff's office, she became acutely aware of being watched. A thin man in a black coat stood across the street, his pale eyes following her movements with clinical interest. When their gazes met, he tipped his hat in a gesture that felt more like a threat than courtesy. The brass nameplate on his office door read, "Dr. Marcus Thornfield, physician and surgeon." The building was one of the newer structures in town, built from imported brick and featuring large windows that would have been expensive to transport. For a frontier doctor, Thornfield seemed to be doing very well for himself. Sarah quickened her pace toward the schoolhouse, but she could feel the doctor's eyes tracking her movement. The sensation was unsettling, not the casual interest of a man observing a stranger, but the calculated assessment of someone evaluating a potential acquisition. The one-room schoolhouse sat on the town's western edge, a modest building with whitewashed walls and a bell tower that had clearly seen better days. The structure was older than most of the town's buildings, probably dating back to the early days of the mining boom. Someone had taken care to maintain it, though the paint was fresh, the windows were clean, and the small garden beside the front door was well tended. Sarah found the teacher, Miss Ellen Crawford, hunched over a stack of papers at her desk. Ellen was a woman in her mid-30s, with the kind of tired beauty that spoke of disappointment and hard choices. Her movements were jerky and nervous, and she looked up with startled eyes when Sarah entered. "Miss Crawford." Sarah stepped into the classroom, immediately noting that it felt too empty, too quiet. "I'm Sarah McKenzie from the Boston Herald." Ellen's hand moved instinctively to her throat, where Sarah could see the faint outline of bruises, old enough to be fading, but recent enough to be concerning. "Miss McKenzie, I heard you were in town." Her voice carried a tremor that grew stronger with each word. "There's not much to see here. Just basics, reading, writing, arithmetic." Sarah pulled out her notebook while discreetly counting the empty desks. 12. In a town of 400 people, 12 empty desks in the only schoolhouse represented a significant portion of the school-age population. "I noticed quite a few unoccupied seats." "Are some of your students participating in Father Miguel's programs?" Ellen's face went ashen and Sarah saw her hands begin to tremble. "We've had changes. Several families took opportunities for their children. Better schools. Back east. That's wonderful. Could I speak with these families? Get their perspective on—" "No." Ellen's voice cracked like a whip, then she immediately tried to compose herself. "I mean, they value privacy. With the troubles we've been having, some relocated for safety." Sarah leaned forward, keeping her voice gentle but insistent. "Miss Crawford, What troubles my research indicates that the Cheyenne in this region have maintained peaceful relations with the territorial government for several years. Ellen's composure cracked completely. "Don't," she whispered, glancing toward the windows, as if expecting to see someone listening. "Don't ask questions. Not here. Not about the children." The terror in Ellen's eyes was so raw that Sarah felt it like a physical blow. This woman wasn't just afraid, she was terrified beyond reason, paralyzed by fear of something so terrible that she couldn't even speak its name. "Ellen," Sarah said softly, using the woman's first name deliberately. "Someone left me a note. About children. Under the church." Ellen's face crumpled, and for a moment Sarah thought she might collapse. "God help us all," she whispered. "They have Lucy. My little Lucy. Lucy is your daughter. Was. Is." Ellen's voice broke. "I don't know anymore. They took her 3 weeks ago. Said it was for her own good. Father Miguel blessed the arrangement, said she'd be going to a wonderful family who could give her opportunities I never could." Sarah felt her reporter's instincts sharpen. What kind of family? They were very specific about what they wanted. Blonde hair, blue eyes, no older than 10. They had forms to fill out questions about her health, her temperament, her measurements. Ellen's voice dropped to a whisper. "They paid in advance. Gold coins. More money than I've seen in my entire life." "Who paid you, Ellen?" "I don't know their names. They worked through Dr. Thornfield. He said there were families back east who wanted to adopt frontier children, give them better lives. But Lucy..." Ellen's voice trailed off, and then she looked directly at Sarah. "Lucy's not going to a family, is she? She's going to be sold like cattle." Sarah knelt beside the woman, her journalistic objectivity warring with human compassion. "Ellen, in your note you said the children are under the church. What did you mean?" Ellen glanced around the empty classroom and then moved to the window to check that they weren't being observed. "Mining tunnels. Old copper mines that connect to the church basement. The mountains are full of them. Most were abandoned when the easy ore ran out. But these tunnels, they're being used for something else now." "What did you see?" "I couldn't sleep one night about 2 weeks ago. I was walking past the church around midnight and I saw lights moving in the basement windows. Then I heard voices Father Miguel and Dr. Thornfield talking about shipments and schedules." Ellen's voice grew stronger as she spoke, as if sharing the burden was giving her courage. "I managed to get close enough to one of the windows to look inside. There were men carrying supplies into a tunnel entrance I'd never seen before. And I saw children's belongings. Clothes, toys, things that looked like they'd been packed for a long journey." "How many children are we talking about?" "I don't know for certain. But over the past year, I've had 15 students withdrawn from school. 15 children whose families suddenly decided they needed better opportunities elsewhere." Ellen's hands were shaking again. "At first, I thought it was wonderful. These families were poor, struggling. The idea that their children could get good educations, better lives. It seemed like a blessing. But you don't think that anymore." "No. Because the children don't write letters. They don't send word back to their families. It's like they just disappeared." Ellen grabbed Sarah's arm. "And now they're talking about expanding the program, bringing in more merchandise." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Merchandise. That's what Dr. Thornfield called them. He said there's a whole network of people back east who want to adopt, but they're very particular about what they want. Age, coloring, background, health. They pay premium prices for children who meet their specifications." "Who else is involved?" "I don't know all of them. Father Miguel, certainly. Dr. Thornfield. Maybe Sheriff Bradley, he trusts Father Miguel completely, never questions anything he does. Ellen's eyes were wild with fear. But there are others. Men who come through town on the train, always meeting with Father Miguel. They dress well, carry themselves like they have money and power. And they all ask the same questions about the local families, about which children might be suitable. As Ellen spoke, Sarah began to understand the scope of what she was uncovering. This wasn't just about Deadwood Junction. It was part of a larger network, a systematic operation that used the isolation of frontier towns to hide crimes that would be immediately detected in more populated areas. "Ellen, why did you write that note to me?" Ellen's laugh was bitter. "Because I was desperate. Because I thought maybe someone from the outside, someone with connections to newspapers back east, might be able to help. But it was stupid. Dangerous. If they find out I talked to you, they won't find out, not from me. You don't understand. They're everywhere in this town. Father Miguel has been here for 5 years, and in that time, he's made himself indispensable. He mediates disputes, provides charity to struggling families, offers hope to people who have nothing left to hope for. People trust him completely. But you don't. I did. God help me, I did." Ellen's voice was filled with self-recrimination. When Lucy was born, Father Miguel baptized her. When her father died in the mine collapse 3 years ago, Father Miguel conducted the funeral. When I couldn't afford to keep the school supplied, Father Miguel found benefactors to help. He was like a father to this community, and I trusted him with my daughter's life. As Ellen spoke, Sarah began to see the full horror of the situation. Father Miguel hadn't just built a criminal enterprise, he had built a community's complete dependence on him. By positioning himself as the town's moral leader and primary source of aid, he had created a situation where questioning his actions was not just difficult, but seemed almost blasphemous. "Ellen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you the only one who knows about this?" Ellen was quiet for a long moment. "There are others who have questions. Families whose children were taken. But they're afraid to speak up. Some have been threatened directly. Others have been made to understand that their continued well-being depends on their silence." "What kind of threats?" "The kind that work in a place like this. Reminders that accidents happen, that mines can collapse, that people can disappear without a trace." Ellen's voice grew harder. "But also financial threats. Many of the families here depend on Father Miguel's charity to survive. Cross him, and that charity disappears." Sarah made rapid notes, her mind racing with the implications. "Ellen, I'm going to need your help. But I understand if you can't risk it. You have to think about your own safety, my safety." Ellen's laugh was harsh. "Miss McKenzie, I wrote that note to you because I have nothing left to lose. They have my daughter. They've destroyed my life. What more can they do to me? They could kill you. Yes, they could. But if I don't try to stop them, more children will disappear. More families will be destroyed. And Lucy..." Ellen's voice broke. "Lucy will be sold to someone who sees her as property, not as a human being. I can't live with that." As Ellen spoke, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had come to Deadwood Junction looking for a simple story about frontier education. Instead, she had uncovered what appeared to be a sophisticated child trafficking operation that used religious authority and community trust as a cover for unspeakable crimes. "What do you need me to do?" Ellen asked. "For now, nothing. Continue your normal routine. Don't let anyone know we've talked. But if you see any unusual activity around the church, any strangers in town, anything that seems connected to the children, find a way to let me know." "How?" Sarah thought for a moment. "Do you have access to the church?" "I clean it twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays." If you need to contact me, leave a note behind the altar. I'll check it every day. As Ellen fled into the gathering dusk, Sarah sat in the empty schoolhouse and tried to process what she'd learned. A child trafficking ring operating under the cover of religious charity and frontier education. Children being evaluated and sold to wealthy families who wanted to customize their adoptions, like ordering goods from a catalog. But she still needed proof. Hard evidence that would convince skeptical authorities and overcome the protective wall that Father Miguel had built around himself through years of community service. That afternoon, Sarah approached St. Augustine's Catholic Church with careful steps. The building rose from the dusty ground like a fortress, its stone walls and expensive stained glass windows incongruous in this rough frontier setting. The recent miners' strike had left many families destitute, yet someone had poured serious money into this church's construction. The architecture was impressive Gothic Revival style with flying buttresses and elaborate stonework that spoke of European training and unlimited resources. The stained glass windows depicted scenes from the life of Christ, but there was something unsettling about the artistic interpretation. The faces were too perfect, too idealized, as if the artist had been more concerned with physical beauty than spiritual meaning. Father Miguel Vasquez was tending to the garden behind the rectory, his movements controlled and purposeful. He was a man in his early 50s, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. Tall and broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair and penetrating brown eyes, he possessed the magnetic personality that made people want to follow him. When he looked up at Sarah's approach, she found herself studying a face that was almost too handsome, too perfect. His features were symmetrical, classical, the kind of face that belonged on a Renaissance painting rather than in a frontier town. His clerical collar was immaculate, despite the dusty environment, and his hands, strong and scarred, spoke of someone who had known both physical labor and violence. "Miss McKenzie." He said, his voice carrying a slight Spanish accent that made every word seem weighted with significance. "I've been expecting you." Sarah felt that familiar chill run down her spine. "Expecting me, Father?" Word travels swiftly in frontier communities. A young reporter from Boston asking questions about our educational initiatives. His smile was warm and welcoming, but Sarah noticed it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'd be honored to discuss our work with the children of this community. Sheriff Bradley mentioned you've been instrumental in helping local children access better schooling opportunities." "Indeed. The children of the frontier deserve opportunities equal to those in established cities. Too many young lives are wasted in places like this, trapped by poverty and circumstance." Father Miguel gestured toward a wooden bench in the shade of the church wall. "I've been blessed to arrange placements for several young people in prestigious Eastern institutions." As they talked, Sarah began cataloging the inconsistencies that marked Father Miguel's presentation. His answers were polished, rehearsed, delivered with the smooth confidence of someone who had told the same story many times before. But there were also moments when she caught glimpses of something else, a calculating intelligence that seemed to be constantly evaluating her reactions. "These educational placements," Sarah said carefully, "they must be quite expensive to arrange. God provides for his chosen work." Father Miguel replied smoothly, "We've been blessed with generous benefactors who understand the importance of proper placement." The word placement carried an odd emphasis that made Sarah's journalistic instincts sharpen. It was the same word Ellen had used, the same clinical terminology that Dr. Thornfield had employed. "Could you tell me more about these benefactors?" "They prefer to remain anonymous. Wealthy families back east who understand the Christian duty to help those less fortunate. They've expressed particular interest in frontier children, young people who embody the pioneer spirit but need guidance to reach their full potential." "And the children who participate in these programs, do they stay in contact with their families here?" Father Miguel's expression grew thoughtful. The transition to civilized society can be challenging for frontier children. Often it's better for them to make a clean break with their past, to fully embrace their new opportunities without the distraction of old connections. Sarah felt a chill at the casual way he dismissed the bonds between children and their families. That seems harsh, Father. Surely the children would benefit from maintaining some connection to their roots. Miss McKenzie. Father Miguel said, his voice taking on a subtle note of authority. You're a young woman from an established Eastern family. You've never known the kind of poverty and desperation that marks the lives of frontier children. When a child is given the chance to escape that life, to become something greater than their circumstances would allow, sometimes difficult choices must be made. As the conversation continued, Sarah became increasingly aware of being studied. Father Miguel's gaze seemed to catalog every detail of her appearance, her height, her youthful features, the way she carried herself. It was the same kind of assessment she had felt from Dr. Thornfield, but more subtle, more sophisticated. "Where are you staying, Miss McKenzie?" Father Miguel asked as their conversation began to wind down. "The Hotel Frontier, though I'm having some difficulties with the accommodations." "Ah, yes. I heard about that. The proprietor can be selective about his guests, particularly young women traveling alone." Father Miguel's expression grew sympathetic. "Please consider staying at the rectory. We have comfortable quarters for visiting religious workers and journalists documenting the church's good work. It would be my pleasure to host someone conducting such important research." Every instinct screamed that accepting this offer would be walking into the lion's den. But Sarah knew she needed to stay close to the source of whatever was happening in Deadwood Junction. If children were being held in tunnels beneath the church, the rectory would give her the best opportunity to investigate. "That's very kind of you, Father. I accept." "Excellent. I'll have Mrs. Patterson prepare the guest room. She serves as our housekeeper and cook, a wonderful woman who's been with us for 3 years. You'll find her meals quite superior to the hotel's offerings." As Sarah prepared to leave, Father Miguel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. The touch was brief, but she felt the strength in those fingers, the controlled power that could easily become violence if circumstances required. "Miss McKenzie," he said, his voice carrying a subtle warning, "I hope you'll remember that frontier communities can be fragile. Stories that seem newsworthy to Eastern readers can sometimes have unintended consequences for the people who must continue living here after the reporters have gone home." "Of course, Father. I'm only interested in the truth." "Truth is a precious commodity," Father Miguel replied. "But like all precious things, it must be handled with care." That evening, as Sarah settled into the rectory's guest room, she found herself thinking about her mother's words. Some truths are worth dying for. Through her window, she could see the church's bell tower silhouetted against the star-filled sky, and she wondered what secrets lay beneath its stone foundations. The guest room was comfortable too, comfortable for a frontier rectory. The furniture was expensive, imported from the East, and the bed was fitted with fine linens that must have cost more than most frontier families earned in a year. Either the church was supporting Father Miguel's mission with considerable resources, or the priest had found other sources of income. Sarah unpacked her few belongings, keeping the derringer hidden in her traveling bag, but easily accessible. She had learned to trust her instincts, and every instinct told her that she was in danger. But she was also closer to the truth than she had ever been, and the thought of those missing children gave her the courage to continue. Before retiring for the night, she decided to explore the rectory's layout. The building was larger than it appeared from outside, with several rooms that seemed to serve no obvious purpose. One door near the rear of the building was locked, and when Sarah pressed her ear against it, she thought she could hear the distant sound of running water. Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper, appeared to be exactly what she seemed, a middle-aged woman who took pride in her work and asked no questions about the church's operations. But Sarah noticed that she avoided certain areas of the rectory. and when asked about the locked door, she claimed to know nothing about it. As Sarah finally settled into bed, she made a mental note to investigate that door further. If there were tunnels beneath the church, there might be access points within the rectory itself. She was just drifting off to sleep when she heard voices from somewhere below her room. Father Miguel's distinctive baritone mixed with another voice she recognized Dr. Thornfield's clinical tones. They were discussing schedules and shipments, using the same kind of language Ellen had overheard. Sarah crept to the floor and pressed her ear against the wooden boards. The voices were muffled, but she could make out enough to understand that they were planning something for the following week. Something that involved the new merchandise and Eastern buyers who were becoming more discriminating. She lay awake for hours after the voices faded, her mind racing with possibilities. She needed allies, people who existed outside the town's power structure and wouldn't be swayed by religious authority or local politics. She needed someone who understood that children were disappearing and that the law wasn't going to save them. She needed Chief Running Bear. The next morning, Sarah made her excuses to Mrs. Patterson and set out for the Cheyenne camp. The journey took her through some of the most spectacular countryside she had ever seen, towering mountains, deep valleys, and endless expanses of grassland that seemed to stretch to the horizon. But she was too focused on her mission to appreciate the beauty. Chief Running Bear's camp lay 3 miles north of town, positioned strategically on high ground that provided clear views of the surrounding territory. The camp consisted of both traditional teepees and more modern cabins, evidence of a people adapting to a changing world while maintaining their cultural identity. Sarah approached on foot, her hands visible and empty, remembering the protocols her journalism professor had taught her about approaching indigenous communities. She had done her research on the Cheyenne, learning about their history, their customs, their recent struggles with the expanding American frontier. The warriors who emerged to greet her were not the savage raiders of frontier legend. They were men protecting their families, and their eyes watchful, but not immediately hostile. They moved with the fluid grace of people who had spent their lives in harmony with the harsh Montana landscape, and their bearing spoke of dignity and pride despite the hardships they had endured. One of them, a young brave with intricate tattoos covering his arms, studied Sarah carefully before gesturing for her to wait. He disappeared into the largest teepee, and Sarah could hear the low murmur of conversation in the Cheyenne language. Chief Running Bear emerged a few minutes later, and Sarah understood immediately why he commanded such respect. He was a man in his late 50s, tall and weathered with iron-gray hair, braided with eagle feathers, and dark eyes that seemed to hold the accumulated wisdom of generations. Despite his age, he moved with the fluid grace of a much younger man, and his presence seemed to fill the space around him. "You are the reporter," he said in English that carried only the slightest accent. "The one asking questions about missing children." Sarah blinked in surprise. "You know about that? News travels swiftly in these mountains, Miss McKenzie, especially when that news concerns children." His expression was grave, and Sarah could see the weight of leadership in his bearing. "My people have been watching the town for many weeks. We see much that others do not. Will you walk with me, Chief Running Bear?" They moved to the edge of the camp, where the Montana territory stretched endlessly toward distant mountains. The landscape was both beautiful and harsh, a reminder of the challenges that frontier communities faced every day. Chief Running Bear was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "3 of our children have vanished," he said finally. 2 moons ago, they went to town to trade for supplies and never returned. The sheriff claims they ran away, but our children do not abandon their families. They understand their responsibilities to the tribe. Sarah's heart pounded. "Have you searched for them?" "We have tried. But the white man's law does not extend to red children, and the sheriff's loyalties lie with those who wear the cross." His voice carried the bitter edge of experience. "We were warned that making trouble would bring soldiers, and my people have suffered enough from the cavalry." What were their names? Little Wolf, a boy of 12 winters. Standing Bear, his sister of 10 winters. And Bright Star, a girl of 8 winters, who was known for her laughter. Chief Running Bear's voice grew softer as he spoke of the children. They were visiting their grandmother in town when they disappeared. She waited for them at the trading post until nightfall, then came to us in tears. Did anyone see them after they left their grandmother? The old woman she is called Singing Bird, she said they were approached by the white doctor. He told them he needed to examine them for signs of sickness, said there was disease in the camp, and he wanted to make sure they were healthy. Sarah felt a chill. Dr. Thornfield? That is the name. He took them to his office, said he would bring them back within the hour. But they never returned, and when Singing Bird went to find them, the doctor claimed they had never been there. And Sheriff Bradley? He said the children had run away to join another tribe. He would not investigate further, said it was not his responsibility to chase after Indian children who couldn't be trusted to stay where they belonged. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Chief Running Bear, I think I know what happened to your children. And I think I know where they are now." The chief's expression didn't change, but Sarah saw his hands clench into fists. "You have proof. I have enough to know where to look for more. There are mining tunnels beneath the church. The children are being held there until they can be transported elsewhere." Transported where? Sold to wealthy families back east who want to adopt, but have very specific requirements about what kind of children they'll accept. Chief Running Bear was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "How many children? I don't know for certain. But I think it's at least 15, possibly more. They're being evaluated like livestock, then sold to the highest bidder. And the authorities are either involved or too trusting of Father Miguel to investigate properly. The priest has spent years building his reputation as the town's moral leader. People trust him completely." Chief Running Bear nodded slowly. "I have seen this before. White men who use the cross to hide their crimes, who speak of God while serving only themselves." His voice grew harder. "What do you propose to do? I need to get into those tunnels. Find the children, document what's happening, gather evidence that even the most skeptical authorities won't be able to ignore. And then I write the story that brings this whole operation crashing down." Chief Running Bear studied her for a long moment. "You are very young to take on such a task, and very small. I'm young, but I'm not helpless. And sometimes being small is an advantage. People underestimate you, dismiss you as harmless. Those men are not harmless. They have killed before, and they will kill again to protect their operation." Sarah felt a chill at the matter-of-fact way he spoke of murder. "How do you know?" "Because 3 months ago, a young woman came to our camp. She was hurt, frightened, spoke of terrible things she had seen in the town. She said she was a reporter like you, and that she was going to expose the truth about missing children." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What happened to her?" "She was found dead in the river 2 days later. The sheriff said she had fallen from her horse, hit her head on a rock. But she had been an excellent rider, and the injuries—" Chief Running Bear shook his head. "They were not from a fall." "What was her name?" "She called herself Rebecca, a small woman with brown hair and intelligent eyes. She reminded me of you." Sarah's heart stopped. Rebecca Hartwell, her roommate from Radcliffe, the brilliant writer who had vanished the previous spring while investigating missing children in Colorado territory. The same Rebecca whose name she would later find on Father Miguel's list of murdered reporters. A Chief Running Bear. Sarah said quietly, "I think that woman was my friend." The chief's expression softened slightly. "Then you understand the danger you face. These men will not hesitate to kill you if they feel threatened. All the more reason to stop them before they can hurt more children." Chief Running Bear was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah's face. "My people have a saying. The wolf that hunts alone rarely survives the winter. If you are determined to do this thing, you will need help. Are you offering to help me? I am offering to help our children. If that path crosses yours, we will walk it together. What about the risk to your people? If the authorities think you're involved in attacking the church, my people are already at risk. Our children are being stolen. Our families are being torn apart. The white man's law offers us no protection, so we must protect ourselves. That afternoon, Sarah and Chief Running Bear began planning their investigation. The chief had extensive knowledge of the mountain's geography, including the network of abandoned mining tunnels that honeycomb the region. Many of these tunnels connected to each other, creating an underground highway that could be used to transport people and goods without detection. The original copper mines were dug by Chinese laborers. Chief Running Bear explained as he sketched a rough map in the dirt. They were skilled miners, but they were also treated badly by the white bosses. Many of them died in cave-ins and accidents. What happened to the survivors? Most left when the mines were abandoned, but some made their homes in the tunnels. They knew secrets about the mountain that the white men never learned. Are any of them still alive? One, an old man called Liu Wei. He lives in a hidden section of the tunnels, rarely comes to the surface, but he sees everything that happens underground. Would he talk to us? Chief Running Bear considered this. Perhaps. He has no love for the white authorities, and he has always been kind to Indian children. If he knew what was happening, where can we find him? That will be the dangerous part. His section of the tunnels can only be reached through the main network, and that network connects to the church basement. Sarah felt a thrill of excitement mixed with terror. So we have to go through the church to reach him. Yes. But if we are caught, we won't be caught. We'll be careful, move only at night, avoid the areas where the children are being held. Chief Running Bear looked skeptical. You have experience with underground exploration. No, Sarah admitted. But I have experience with dangerous situations. And I have something more important than experience. I have motivation. That evening, Sarah returned to the rectory with a plan forming in her mind. She would wait until the household was asleep, then make her way to the church basement and locate the tunnel entrance Ellen had described. If she could find Liu Wei and convince him to talk, she might have the evidence she needed to expose the trafficking operation. But first, she needed to gather more information about the rectory's layout and the routines of its inhabitants. She spent the evening observing Mrs. Patterson's movements, noting when Father Miguel retired to his quarters, listening for any sounds that might indicate activity in the basement. Around midnight, she heard the same voices she had detected the night before. Father Miguel and Dr. Thornfield discussing their operation in clinical terms that made her skin crawl. But tonight, there was a third voice, one she didn't recognize. A man with an educated accent who spoke about Eastern markets and quality control. Sarah crept to the floor and pressed her ear against the wooden boards, straining to hear more details. The conversation was about a shipment scheduled for the following week, a group of children who would be transported east to buyers who had already paid substantial deposits. The buyers are becoming more sophisticated, the unknown voice was saying. They want detailed photographs, medical evaluations, psychological assessments. They're treating this like a business transaction, which it is. Good, Father Miguel replied. Professional standards will help us expand the operation. I have contacts in 6 other territories who are interested in establishing similar programs. And the local authorities, completely under control. The sheriff trusts me implicitly, and the territorial marshal is more interested in Indian troubles than missing children. Sarah felt sick as she listened to them discuss the trafficking operation with the casual efficiency of businessmen planning a commercial venture. These men weren't motivated by desperation or mental illness. They were cold-blooded entrepreneurs who had found a profitable market in human misery. The conversation continued for another hour, providing Sarah with valuable intelligence about the scope of the operation. The trafficking network extended far beyond Deadwood Junction, encompassing multiple territories and involving dozens of corrupt officials. The children were being transported by railroad using forged documents that identified them as legitimate adoptees traveling to new homes. When the voices finally faded, Sarah lay awake planning her next move. She needed to reach Liu Wei, but she also needed to document what she had learned. If something happened to her, someone else would need to continue the investigation. She spent the remaining hours before dawn, writing a detailed account of everything she had discovered, including the names of everyone involved and the locations of the tunnel entrances. She sealed the letter in an envelope addressed to her editor at the Boston Herald, then hid it in her traveling bag, where it would be found if she disappeared. The next morning brought an unexpected complication. Dr. Thornfield arrived at the rectory just as Sarah was finishing breakfast, and his presence immediately set her on edge. "Miss McKenzie," he said, his pale eyes studying her with clinical interest. "I hope you're finding your accommodations comfortable." "Very comfortable, thank you." "Father Miguel tells me you're writing about our educational programs. I'd be happy to provide you with medical documentation about the children's health and development." Sarah's pulse quickened. "That's very kind of you, Doctor. What sort of documentation?" "Complete medical evaluations, including physical measurements, psychological assessments, family histories. We maintain detailed records to ensure that each child is placed in the most appropriate environment." The casual way he spoke about placing children-like objects made Sarah's stomach turn. "I'd be very interested in seeing those records." "Excellent. Why don't you come to my office this afternoon? I can show you our complete filing system." As Dr. Thornfield left, Sarah realized she was being drawn deeper into the web of the trafficking operation. The doctor's offer to show her the records was almost certainly a trap, but it was also an opportunity to gather evidence that could expose the entire network. She spent the morning exploring the rectory more thoroughly, paying particular attention to the locked door she had noticed the night before. When Mrs. Patterson was busy with housework, Sarah managed to examine the door more closely. It was heavy oak, reinforced with iron bands, and secured with a lock that looked new and expensive. But more importantly, she could hear the sound of running water from behind the door, and occasionally the faint echo of voices. This door led to the tunnel, she was certain of it. That afternoon, Sarah made her way to Dr. Thornfield's office with the derringer hidden in her purse and her notebook, ready to document whatever she found. The building was busier than she had expected, with several well-dressed men waiting in the outer office. They had the look of businessmen or government officials, and they watched her with the same calculating interest she had seen in Father Miguel's eyes. Dr. Thornfield greeted her with professional courtesy, but Sarah could sense the predatory anticipation beneath his polished manner. He led her to his private office, where filing cabinets lined the walls and medical equipment occupied every available surface. "These are our records," he said, gesturing to the cabinets. "Each child receives a complete evaluation before placement. We document everything: physical characteristics, intellectual capacity, emotional stability, family background." He opened one of the cabinets and pulled out a thick folder. "This is Lucy Crawford's file. Perhaps you'd like to see the thoroughness of our evaluation process." Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were dozens of pages of detailed notes, measurements, and assessments. Lucy was described in clinical terms that reduced her to a collection of physical and psychological attributes. There were photographs, dozens of them, showing the child from every angle, like a piece of merchandise being cataloged for sale. "As you can see," Dr. Thornfield continued, "we're very thorough. Our buyers appreciate detailed documentation, and we pride ourselves on providing exactly what they're looking for." Sarah forced herself to remain calm as she studied the file. "How many children have you evaluated?" "Over the past year, approximately 25. Not all were suitable for placement, of course." Some had physical defects or behavioral problems that made them unmarketable. What happens to the unsuitable ones? Dr. Thornfield's expression grew cold. They're returned to their families naturally. We're not monsters, Miss McKenzie. We're providing a service that benefits everyone involved. But Sarah had noticed something in his tone, a slight hesitation that suggested the fate of unsuitable children was not as benign as he claimed. She made a mental note to investigate further. "I'd like to see more files," she said. "Of course. But first, I think you should undergo an evaluation yourself." Sarah's blood ran cold. "I beg your pardon. It's standard procedure for anyone involved in our program. We need to ensure that our associates meet certain standards of quality and reliability. I'm not involved in your program. I'm a journalist documenting Miss McKenzie." Dr. Thornfield interrupted, his voice taking on a harder edge. "I think you misunderstand your situation. You're not here to document our program. You're here to become part of it." Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her purse, but Dr. Thornfield was faster. He grabbed her wrist with surprising strength, his fingers digging into her flesh with clinical precision. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said quietly. "You're outnumbered, and frankly, you're exactly the type of merchandise our buyers are looking for. Young, attractive, educated, with that appealing vulnerability that certain collectors find irresistible." Sarah's mind raced as she realized the full extent of her danger. She wasn't just investigating a child trafficking ring, she was intended to be one of its victims. "You're insane," she managed to say. "I'm practical. And speaking of practicality, we need to discuss your future arrangements." Dr. Thornfield released her wrist, but remained close enough to grab her again if she tried to escape. "You see, Miss McKenzie, your arrival in Deadwood Junction was not the coincidence you believe it to be." "What do you mean?" "The letter that brought you here, the one from the Western Education Foundation, was written by Father Miguel. We've been recruiting young women journalists for months using the same technique. Your credentials, your appearance, your reputation as a crusading reporter, all of it made you perfect for our purposes." Sarah felt the room spinning around her as the horrible truth hit her. "You used me as bait." "Indeed. Young women reporters are quite popular with a certain type of collector. They appreciate the irony of owning someone who was once dedicated to exposing the truth." "How many others?" "You're the 5th this year. The others were less cooperative than we hope you'll be." Sarah thought of Rebecca Hartwell, her brilliant roommate who had died trying to expose these monsters. What happened to them? That depends on their level of cooperation. Some have been successfully placed with collectors who appreciate their unique qualities. Others— Dr. Thornfield's expression grew cold. Others proved too difficult to handle. Sarah realized she was looking at a man who had murdered multiple women and who was planning to either sell her into slavery or kill her if she proved unsuitable. The casual way he discussed these atrocities made her understand that she was dealing with someone who had lost all connection to human decency. "I need to examine you now." Dr. Thornfield continued gesturing toward the examination table. "Our buyers have very specific requirements, and I need to determine whether you meet their standards." "I'm not getting on that table." "Miss McKenzie, you misunderstand your situation. You're going to cooperate with this evaluation one way or another. The only question is whether you do so voluntarily or whether I need to sedate you first." Sarah saw him reaching for a syringe filled with clear liquid, and she knew she was running out of time. She needed to act now before he could drug her into compliance. "All right," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "But I need to know more about the process. What exactly are you evaluating?" Dr. Thornfield smiled, apparently pleased by her apparent submission. "Physical characteristics primarily. Height, weight, bone structure, coloring. But also psychological factors, intelligence, emotional stability, capacity for adaptation. And the buyers, what do they do with the women you sell them? That depends on the buyer. Some are collectors who simply want to own something beautiful and unique. Others have more practical applications in mind. Sarah felt sick as she realized the full scope of what she was uncovering. This wasn't just about child trafficking, it was about the systematic enslavement of anyone who met certain physical and psychological criteria. How long has this been going on? Our particular operation has been active for 18 months. But the network itself is much older, much more extensive. We have contacts in every major city buyers who are willing to pay premium prices for the right merchandise. As Dr. Thornfield continued to explain the operation, Sarah began to understand that she was looking at something far more sinister than a simple criminal enterprise. This was a systematic assault on human dignity, a business model that treated people as commodities to be bought and sold. But understanding the scope of the horror also gave her a new sense of purpose. If she could survive this encounter, if she could gather enough evidence to expose the entire network, she might be able to save hundreds of lives. "I need to use the ladies' room," she said suddenly. Dr. Thornfield looked annoyed. "Make it quick. We have a schedule to keep." Sarah nodded and moved toward the door, her hand sliding into her purse to grip the Derringer. She had one shot literally to escape this trap. As she reached the door, she spun around and pulled the gun, pointing it directly at Dr. Thornfield's chest. "Step away from the desk," she said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. Dr. Thornfield's expression changed from annoyance to cold calculation. "Miss McKenzie, you're making a serious mistake." The mistake was coming here alone. But I'm not making that mistake again. "You can't shoot me. You're not a killer." "You're right. I'm not. But I am someone who's seen what you do to children, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to stop you." Sarah backed toward the door, keeping the gun trained on the doctor. "I'm leaving now. If you try to follow me, if you try to stop me, I will shoot you. You won't get far. Father Miguel knows you're here. The whole town is watching you." "Then I'll have to be careful, won't I?" Sarah reached the door and fumbled for the handle, not daring to take her eyes off Dr. Thornfield. But as she opened the door, she heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy boots, multiple men approaching quickly. She had been trapped. "I told you that you misunderstood your situation," Dr. Thornfield said, his confidence returning. "Did you really think we would let you walk into our operation without taking precautions?" The door burst open, and 3 men entered the room. They were armed and moved with the efficiency of professionals' hired guns, Sarah realized, not local volunteers. "Take her," Dr. Thornfield ordered. Sarah fired the Derringer, but the small bullet barely slowed the first man down. He grabbed her arm and twisted it behind her back, forcing her to drop the gun. The pain was excruciating, but she forced herself to remain conscious and alert. "Careful," Dr. Thornfield warned. "She's valuable merchandise. Don't damage her unnecessarily." Sarah was dragged from the office and bundled into a wagon waiting outside. As they drove through the streets of Deadwood Junction, she saw people going about their daily business, oblivious to the horror that was happening right under their noses. The wagon stopped at the church, and Sarah was hauled through a side entrance she hadn't noticed before. They descended a stone stairway into the basement, where she saw the tunnel entrance Ellen had described. The tunnels were larger than she had expected, clearly engineered for heavy use. Electric lights had been installed at regular intervals, and she could hear the sound of machinery in the distance. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a sophisticated operations center. They brought her to a natural cavern that had been converted into a holding area, and Sarah's heart broke at what she saw. 15 children ranging in age from 6 to 14 were chained to the walls with iron shackles. They were clean and adequately fed, but their eyes held the hollow look of animals that had been caged too long. Among them, she recognized faces from the school records, white children from local families. But there were also 3 Native American children who had to be the ones Chief Running Bear had described. And in the corner, a small blonde girl who could only be Lucy Crawford. "Lucy," Sarah whispered. The girl looked up with eyes that were too old for her face. "Are you here to take us away to—" Before Sarah could answer, she heard footsteps in the tunnel behind them. Father Miguel emerged from the passage flanked by the same armed men who had captured her. "Miss McKenzie," he said, his voice carrying genuine disappointment. "I had hoped you would be more cooperative. But I suppose we should have expected this. Young women journalists are notoriously difficult to handle. You're trafficking children." Sarah said, her voice shaking with rage despite her fear. "Selling them like cattle. I'm saving them." Father Miguel replied, his voice carrying the fervor of a true believer. "These children were born into poverty and ignorance. I'm giving them opportunities they could never have otherwise. By selling them to the highest bidder, by placing them with families who can provide education, culture, refinement, they will become productive members of society instead of dying forgotten in this wilderness." Sarah looked at the chained children, at the terror in their eyes, at the systematic dehumanization that Father Miguel was describing as charity. "You're insane. I'm visionary. Cast out by a church too timid to embrace necessary change, I found my own way to serve God's plan." Father Miguel's eyes blazed with fanatic certainty. "These children will be grateful for what I've done for them. In time, they'll understand that their suffering was necessary for their salvation." "And what about me? What's your justification for kidnapping a journalist?" "You're not just a journalist, Miss McKenzie. You're merchandise. Very valuable merchandise, in fact. Your education, your appearance, your spirit, that all of it makes you extremely attractive to certain types of collectors." Sarah felt sick as she realized the full scope of Father Miguel's operation. He wasn't just trafficking children, he was running a full-scale slavery operation that targeted anyone who met his buyer's specifications. "How many people have you sold?" "Over the past 18 months, approximately 40. Not all children, of course. We've expanded our inventory to include young women who possess certain desirable qualities." "You're talking about human beings. I'm talking about resources. God has given me the vision to see potential where others see only waste. These children, these young women, they were wasting their lives in poverty and ignorance. I'm giving them purpose." As Father Miguel spoke, Sarah began to understand that she was looking at a man who had constructed an elaborate theological justification for his crimes. He genuinely believed that he was doing God's work, that his victims should be grateful for their enslavement. But she also noticed something else, the way the children were looking at her, the hope that flickered in their eyes despite their terror. They were counting on her to save them, and she couldn't let them down. "Father," she said carefully, "before you proceed with whatever you're planning, I need to tell you something. I'm not here alone." Father Miguel's expression sharpened. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Chief Running Bear knows where I am. If I don't return to his camp by midnight, he's going to come looking for me. The Indians don't dare attack the church. They know the consequences. These Indians have had their children stolen. They're beyond caring about consequences." Father Miguel was quiet for a moment, considering this information. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change your situation. You're valuable merchandise, and we have buyers waiting. Then you're going to have to fight for me, if necessary." But Sarah had noticed something while Father Miguel was speaking. One of the tunnel entrances was partially hidden behind a rock fall, and she could see fresh air moving through the opening. If she could reach that tunnel, she might be able to escape. The problem was the 20 feet of open ground between her current position and the tunnel entrance. She would have to move fast, and she would need a distraction. "Father," she said, "I want to make you a proposition." "I'm listening." "You're running a business. You understand profit and loss. What if I could bring you more valuable merchandise than you've ever had before?" Father Miguel's eyes lit up with interest. "Continue." "I have connections to other journalists, other young women who would be perfect for your operation. If you let me go, I can arrange for them to visit Deadwood Junction. You could triple your inventory within a month." "And why would you do that?" "Because I understand business too. You're going to sell me regardless of what I do. But if I cooperate, if I help you expand your operation, maybe you'll treat me better than the others." Father Miguel studied her for a long moment. "You're trying to manipulate me. I'm trying to survive, and I'm offering you a mutually beneficial arrangement." "What exactly are you proposing?" Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would determine whether she lived or died. "Let me write to my editor. Tell him I've found an amazing story about frontier education that requires extended research, that will buy you time to expand your operation without raising suspicions. And in exchange, you don't drug me. You don't chain me up like these children. You give me a chance to prove my value to your organization." Father Miguel was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the advantages of her proposal. Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes, the cold assessment of profit and risk. "You have 1 week," he said finally. "Write your letter, convince your editor that you need more time. But understand, if you try to escape, if you try to betray us, these children will pay the price." "I understand." "Good. Dr. Thornfield will provide you with writing materials. You'll compose the letter under his supervision, and we'll review it before it's sent." As Father Miguel turned to leave, Sarah knew she had bought herself some time, but not much. She needed to find a way to escape and alert the authorities before the trafficking operation could relocate. But first, she needed to find Chief Running Bear. That night, as Sarah was led back to the rectory under guard, she began planning her escape. The locked door she had noticed earlier was almost certainly connected to the tunnel system, and if she could reach it, she might be able to find her way to Liu Wei's section of the underground network. The challenge was getting past her guards. Father Miguel had stationed 2 men outside her room, and she could hear them talking in low voices through the thin walls. They were professionals, alert and suspicious, but they were also confident that she was trapped. Sarah waited until the early hours of the morning when she heard the guards' conversation die down to occasional murmurs. Then she began her escape attempt. She had noticed that the guest room's window overlooked the church's bell tower, and that there was a narrow ledge connecting the rectory to the church's roof. It was a dangerous route, but it was her only option. Sarah tied her sheets together to create a makeshift rope, then carefully opened the window. The night air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of approaching snow. She could see stars blazing in the clear sky, and in the distance the faint glow of campfires from Chief Running Bear's camp. The ledge was narrower than she had hoped, barely wide enough for her feet. Sarah forced herself not to look down as she inched her way along the stone wall, her fingers finding purchase in the gaps between the stones. One slip, one moment of lost balance, and she would fall to her death on the rocks below. But she made it to the church's roof without incident. From there, she was able to climb down to a side entrance that she had noticed during her earlier explorations. The door was locked, but the lock was old and yielded to her hairpin after several tense minutes. Inside the church, Sarah made her way to the basement, following the route she had memorized during her captivity. The tunnel entrance was exactly where she remembered it, and she could hear the sound of running water in the distance. The tunnels were darker than she had expected, lit only by widely spaced electric bulbs that cast eerie shadows on the stone walls. Sarah moved carefully, trying to remember the layout from her earlier glimpse. She needed to find Liu Wei's section of the network, but she also needed to avoid the areas where the children were being held. After what felt like hours of careful navigation, she heard voices ahead. Not the harsh tones of Father Miguel's men, but something softer, more musical. She followed the sound through a narrow passage that opened into a surprisingly comfortable chamber. Liu Wei was exactly as Chief Running Bear had described him, an elderly Chinese man with intelligent eyes and gentle hands. He was sitting beside a small fire, speaking quietly to 3 figures Sarah recognized as the missing Cheyenne children. "You are the reporter," Liu Wei said in accented English as Sarah entered the chamber. "Little Wolf told me you would come." Sarah looked at the Indian boy, who couldn't have been more than 12. "How did you know?" Chief Running Bear sent word through the old passages. He said to watch for a small white woman who asked questions about missing children. You've been helping them. I have been hiding them. When the white doctor brought them to the tunnels, I saw what was happening. I could not let children be sold like animals. Sarah felt a surge of hope. Are they all right? They are frightened but unharmed. The doctor does not know they are here. He thinks they escaped through the mountain passages. We need to get them back to their families. Yes. But first we need to rescue the others. The white children are still in the holding area, and they cannot escape without help. Sarah realized that her escape from the rectory had only been the beginning. If she wanted to save all the children, she would need to return to the very place she had just fled. Liu Wei, so, she said, I need to ask you something. Are you willing to help us rescue the other children? The old man's expression grew serious. I have lived in these mountains for 40 years. I have seen many evils, but nothing like this. These men must be stopped. It's dangerous. If we're caught, if we do nothing more, children will suffer. That is not acceptable. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for this unexpected ally. What do you know about the tunnel system? I know every passage, every chamber, every entrance and exit. I helped dig many of these tunnels when I was young. Liu Wei's eyes glinted with determination. I know how to move through them without being detected. Can you get us to the holding area? Yes, but we will need weapons, and we will need a plan for getting the children to safety once we free them. Sarah thought about Chief Running Bear's camp, about the warriors who were waiting for word of their missing children. I think I know who can help us. Over the next hour, Sarah and Liu Wei developed a plan that was both audacious and dangerous. They would use the tunnel system to reach Chief Running Bear's camp, then return with a force of Cheyenne warriors to rescue the children and capture the traffickers. But as they prepared to leave, Sarah heard footsteps in the main tunnel. Many footsteps moving with military precision. Father Miguel's men had discovered her escape and were searching the tunnels. We're trapped, Liu Wei whispered. Sarah looked around the chamber, noting the narrow passages that led deeper into the mountain. Not trapped. We just need to take a different route. The deep passages are dangerous, easy to get lost, and some of them are unstable. More dangerous than staying here. Liu Wei nodded grimly. You are right. We go deeper. The next few hours were a nightmare of cramped passages and shifting rock. Sarah found herself crawling through spaces barely wide enough for her body, following Liu Wei's lead as he navigated by memory and instinct. The 3 Cheyenne children followed without complaint, their resilience and courage, putting the adults to shame. Finally, they emerged from a hidden exit on the mountainside, several miles from Deadwood Junction. The sun was rising, painting the peaks gold and crimson, and Sarah could see smoke rising from Chief Running Bear's camp in the distance. We made it, Little Wolf said, his voice filled with wonder. We made it out, Sarah corrected. But we're not finished yet. Chief Running Bear was waiting for them when they reached the camp, as if he had sensed their approach. His face showed no surprise at seeing his missing children, but Sarah could see the relief in his eyes. You found them, he said simply. Liu Wei found them and saved them. But there are 12 other children still trapped in those tunnels. Chief Running Bear's expression hardened. Tell me what you learned. Sarah spent the next hour describing everything she had discovered, the scope of the trafficking operation, and the involvement of Father Miguel and Dr. Thornfield, the network of buyers and corrupt officials. She also described the layout of the tunnel system and the location of the holding area. How many men are guarding the children? Chief Running Bear asked. I saw at least 6, but there may be more. They're well armed and they're professionals. And the authorities? Sheriff Bradley is either corrupt or completely deceived. We can't count on any help from official sources. Chief Running Bear nodded grimly. Then we do this ourselves. Chief, I need to ask you something. Are you prepared for the consequences of attacking the church? The territorial government will call it an Indian raid. They'll use it as an excuse to bring in the cavalry. My people are already being destroyed one child at a time. If fighting back brings the soldiers, at least we'll die with honor." Sarah understood that she was looking at a man who had been pushed beyond his breaking point. The systematic theft of his people's children had left him with no choice but to fight regardless of the consequences. "All right," she said. "But we do this smart. We rescue the children, we capture the traffickers, and we make sure the evidence of their crimes is so overwhelming that even the territorial government can't ignore it. What do you propose? We go in tonight during the new moon. Liu Wei guides us through the tunnels to the holding area. We free the children and capture Father Miguel and Dr. Thornfield alive. Then we force them to confess their crimes in front of witnesses. And if they refuse to confess," Sarah thought about Rebecca Hartwell and the other young women who had died trying to expose this operation. "Then we make sure their crimes are exposed anyway." Chief Running Bear assembled a force of 12 warriors, all of them men who had lost children or relatives to the trafficking operation. They were skilled fighters, but more importantly, they were motivated by a burning desire for justice. Liu Wei provided detailed maps of the tunnel system marking the locations of guards, the holding area, and the various escape routes. He also identified the electrical system that powered the underground lights and showed them how to disable it to create confusion. As night fell, Sarah found herself preparing for what might be the most dangerous mission of her life. She had traded her traveling dress for practical clothing borrowed from the Cheyenne women, and she carried a rifle provided by Chief Running Bear. "You don't have to do this," the chief told her as they prepared to leave. "This is not your fight." "Yes, it is," Sarah replied. "It became my fight the moment I saw those children in chains." The journey back to the church took them through mountain passes that Sarah had never seen before. Chief Running Bear led them along paths known only to his people, ancient trails that had been used for generations to move unseen through the landscape. They reached the tunnel entrance just after midnight. Liu Wei had provided them with a detailed timeline. The guards changed shifts at regular intervals, and there was a 20-minute window when the holding area would be lightly defended. Sarah's heart was pounding as they descended into the tunnels. This was the moment of truth. Either they would succeed in rescuing the children, or they would all die in the attempt. The tunnels were darker than Sarah remembered, lit only by the occasional electric bulb. Liu Wei led them through a maze of passages, his intimate knowledge of the system allowing them to avoid the main routes where guards might be patrolling. As they approached the holding area, Sarah could hear the sound of children crying softly in the darkness. The sound filled her with rage and determination. These monsters had terrorized innocent children for long enough. Chief Running Bear signaled for the group to halt. Through a gap in the rock wall, they could see the cavern where the children were being held. 2 guards sat near the entrance, playing cards and drinking whiskey. They looked bored and complacent, confident that their prisoners were secure. Sarah watched as Chief Running Bear and 2 of his warriors crept forward, moving with the silent grace of predators. The guards never knew what hit them. One moment they were laughing at a joke, the next they were unconscious on the stone floor. "Quickly," Liu Wei whispered. "We have maybe 10 minutes before the next patrol." Sarah and the Cheyenne warriors rushed into the cavern. The children looked up with terror-filled eyes, expecting to see their captors. When they realized they were being rescued, several began to cry with relief. "It's all right," Sarah whispered to Lucy Crawford as she worked to unlock the girls' chains. "We're here to take you home." But as they freed the last of the children, Sarah heard the sound she had been dreading, footsteps echoing through the tunnels, many footsteps moving quickly and purposefully. "They know we're here," Chief Running Bear said grimly. "The electrical system," Liu Wei said suddenly. "If we cut the power, they'll be blind in the tunnels." One of the Cheyenne warriors nodded and disappeared into a side passage. Moments later, the lights went out, plunging the tunnel system into absolute darkness. In the confusion that followed, Sarah heard shouts and gunfire echoing through the passages. Father Miguel's men were shooting blindly, trying to prevent the rescue party from escaping with their valuable merchandise. This way." Liu Wei whispered, his voice barely audible above the chaos. "There's another exit." Sarah found herself crawling through narrow passages in total darkness, following the sound of Liu Wei's voice and the touch of his hand on her shoulder. Behind her, she could hear the children moving with remarkable courage, their soft whispers the only sound they made. The passage seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning through the mountain's depths. Sarah began to worry that they were lost, trapped in the underground maze, while Father Miguel's men searched for them with torches and lanterns. But finally, she saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. The passage opened onto a natural ledge on the mountainside, hidden from below by overhanging rock. They had made it to safety. Sarah counted the children as they emerged from the tunnel. 15, all of them present and accounted for. The 3 Cheyenne children were reunited with their families, while the white children huddled together in confusion and fear. "What now?" Chief Running Bear asked. "Now we make sure this never happens again," Sarah replied. "We need to get these children to safety, and we need to make sure Father Miguel and Dr. Thornfield are arrested. The authorities won't believe us. They'll say we attacked the church without cause. They'll believe the children, and they'll believe the evidence." Sarah thought about the files she had seen in Dr. Thornfield's office, the detailed records of the trafficking operation. If she could get her hands on those documents, she would have proof that even the most corrupt officials couldn't ignore. "I need to go back," she said suddenly. "Are you insane?" Chief Running Bear stared at her. "You just escaped from those tunnels. Why would you want to go back?" "Because the evidence is still there. Dr. Thornfield's files, Father Miguel's correspondence, the financial records, everything we need to expose this operation is still in that office. It's too dangerous. They'll be expecting you. Maybe. But they'll also be focused on searching the tunnels and securing the children they think are still trapped down there. The office might be unguarded." Chief Running Bear considered this. "If you're determined to do this, you won't go alone. I'll go with Liu Wei. He knows the tunnel system better than anyone." The old Chinese man nodded grimly. "The passages that lead to the doctor's building are different from the ones we used to reach the church. Less heavily guarded." Sarah looked at the rescued children, at the hope and trust in their eyes. These children would never be truly safe until the entire trafficking network was destroyed. And that meant gathering evidence that would convince even the most skeptical authorities. "Get the children to safety," she told Chief Running Bear. "Take them to the territorial marshal in Helena. Make sure they're protected. And you, I'll meet you there, with enough evidence to hang every one of these monsters." The journey back into the tunnels was even more terrifying the second time. Sarah knew that Father Miguel's men would be searching for them, and that capture would mean certain death. But she also knew that this was her only chance to gather the evidence needed to destroy the trafficking network. Liu Wei led her through passages she had never seen before, ancient tunnels that predated the mining operations. These tunnels were older, more primitive, but they were also less likely to be patrolled by Father Miguel's men. They emerged in the basement of Dr. Thornfield's building, accessing it through a concealed entrance that Liu Wei had discovered years earlier. The building was dark and seemingly empty, but Sarah could hear voices from the upper floors. "They're still here," she whispered. "Then we must be very careful," Liu Wei replied. They crept up the stairs to Dr. Thornfield's office. The door was unlocked, and the filing cabinet stood open, evidence that the doctor had been preparing to destroy his records. But he hadn't finished the job. Sarah began stuffing files into a cloth bag, working as quickly as she could in the dim light. The documents were even more damning than she had hoped, detailed records of dozens of children correspondence with buyers' financial records showing payments of thousands of dollars. But it was the final file that made her blood run cold. It contained a list of names: 23 young women journalists who had been lured to remote frontier towns and murdered when they got too close to the truth. Rebecca Hartwell's name was on the list, along with details of her death and disposal. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she read about her friend's final moments, about the courage Rebecca had shown, even when facing certain death. "Sarah," Liu Wei's voice was urgent. "Someone's coming." Sarah grabbed the remaining files and stuffed them into her bag. She could hear footsteps on the stairs, heavy boots moving with military precision. They had run out of time. "The window," Liu Wei whispered. They climbed through the office window onto the roof of the adjacent building. Sarah could hear shouts from inside the office as Father Miguel's men discovered the missing files. "They'll search the entire town," Liu Wei said. "We need to get far away from here." "No," Sarah replied. "We need to get to the telegraph office. These files need to reach the territorial marshal and the federal authorities immediately. The telegraph office will be watched. Then we'll have to be smarter than they are." Sarah and Liu Wei spent the next hour moving through the shadows of Deadwood Junction, avoiding the search parties that were combing the streets. Father Miguel's men were everywhere, but they were focusing on the obvious hiding places: the hotel, the train station, the main roads out of town. The telegraph office was located in a small building near the railroad depot. Sarah could see 2 guards stationed outside, but the building itself appeared to be unoccupied. "Can you create a distraction?" she asked Liu Wei. The old man nodded. "Give me 5 minutes." Sarah watched as Liu Wei disappeared into the darkness. A few minutes later, she heard shouts from the direction of the church. Apparently someone had spotted an intruder near the bell tower. The guards outside the telegraph office ran toward the commotion, leaving the building undefended. Sarah slipped inside and quickly composed a telegram to the territorial marshal in Helena. She included the most damning evidence from Dr. Thornfield's files, along with the location of the tunnel system and the identities of the key conspirators. But as she prepared to send the message, she heard footsteps outside. The guards were returning, and they would discover her in moments. Sarah finished the telegram and pushed the send button just as the door burst open. Father Miguel himself entered, flanked by 4 armed men. "Miss McKenzie," he said, his voice carrying cold fury. "You've caused us considerable trouble." "Good," Sarah replied. "I hope I've caused you enough trouble to destroy your entire operation. You've delayed us nothing more. We'll relocate the operation, find new sources of merchandise, rebuild our network. Not with these files in the hands of the territorial marshal." Father Miguel's expression grew puzzled. "What files?" Sarah smiled grimly. "The ones I just sent to Helena. Complete records of your trafficking operation, including the names of your buyers and the details of your financial arrangements." Father Miguel's face went white. "You're lying. I might check Dr. Thornfield's office, see how many files are missing." One of Father Miguel's men whispered something in his ear, and Sarah saw the priest's composure crack completely. For the first time since she had met him, he looked genuinely afraid. "You have no idea what you've done," he said quietly. "The people we work for, they don't forgive mistakes." "Then you'd better hope the territorial marshal gets to you before they do." Father Miguel raised his gun, pointing it directly at Sarah's head. "You've destroyed everything I've worked for, everything I've built. I've saved the lives of innocent children. That's worth destroying your sick little empire. You self-righteous little fool. Do you think this ends with me? Do you think killing me will stop what we've started?" "It's a beginning." Father Miguel's finger tightened on the trigger, and Sarah knew she was about to die. She closed her eyes and thought of her mother, of Rebecca Hartwell, of all the young women who had died trying to expose this horror. The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the small room. But Sarah felt no pain, no impact. She opened her eyes to see Father Miguel collapsing to the floor, blood spreading from a wound in his chest. Chief Running Bear stood in the doorway, his rifle smoking. Behind him, Sarah could see Liu Wei and several Cheyenne warriors. "You came back," she said, her voice shaking with relief. "I told you the wolf that hunts alone rarely survives the winter." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The territorial marshal arrived on the morning train, along with a company of federal marshals and a team of investigators. Sarah's telegram had triggered a massive law enforcement response, and Deadwood Junction was swarming with officials. Dr. Thornfield was found dead in his office, apparently having taken poison rather than face arrest. His files provided a complete picture of the trafficking operation, including the identities of buyers, corrupt officials, and other participants in the network. The children were taken into protective custody and gradually reunited with their families. Lucy Crawford's reunion with her mother was particularly emotional, with both of them crying as they embraced. Sheriff Bradley, devastated by the revelation of Father Miguel's crimes, resigned his position and left town. But before he departed, he provided valuable testimony about the priest's activities and the extent of local corruption. The investigation expanded rapidly as federal authorities followed the leads provided by Dr. Thornfield's files. Similar operations were uncovered in 6 other territories, leading to dozens of arrests and the rescue of hundreds of children. Sarah found herself at the center of a media storm that reached the front pages of newspapers across the country. Her detailed account of the trafficking operation shocked the nation and led to congressional hearings on frontier law enforcement. But it was the personal cost of her investigation that haunted her. Rebecca Hartwell and 22 other young women had died trying to expose these crimes. Their courage and sacrifice had made Sarah's success possible, but she would never forget the price they had paid. As she prepared to leave Deadwood Junction, Sarah visited the graves of the women who had died fighting the trafficking network. She left flowers at each grave and promised that their stories would be told, that their sacrifice would not be forgotten. Chief Running Bear's broken leg had healed, though he walked with a slight limp. The experience had forged an unexpected alliance between the Cheyenne and the remaining white residents of Deadwood Junction, united by their shared horror at what had been done to their children. "You could stay," Chief Running Bear told her as she prepared to board the train to Denver. "There's work to be done here helping the community heal." "There's work to be done everywhere," Sarah replied. The trafficking network extended far beyond Deadwood Junction. There are other Father Miguels out there, other operations that need to be exposed. "And you intend to find them all?" Sarah thought about the list of 23 dead journalists, about the children who were still missing, about the buyers who had escaped justice. "I intend to try." Chief Running Bear handed her a small leather pouch, a traditional Cheyenne medicine bag containing sage and sweetgrass. "For protection on your journey," he said. "And to remember that courage comes in many forms." Sarah accepted the gift with gratitude. "What will you do now?" "Rebuild. Heal. Make sure this never happens again." Chief Running Bear's expression was determined. "And remember the young woman who risked everything to save our children." The train to Denver arrived as the sun was setting behind the mountains. Sarah boarded with her story written and filed, her evidence carefully documented, and her resolve stronger than ever. In her traveling bag, she carried copies of all the files she had recovered, along with the list of murdered journalists. She also carried a letter from Lucy Crawford, a simple note that said, "Thank you for bringing me home." As the train pulled away from Deadwood Junction, Sarah opened her notebook and began writing her next story. Somewhere in Denver, other Father Miguels were operating their own networks, preying on the innocent and hiding behind masks of respectability. The telegraph lines were carrying news of the Deadwood Junction investigation across the country, and Sarah knew that other operations would be scrambling to cover their tracks. But she had learned their methods, understood their psychology, and most importantly, she had allies who would help her continue the fight. She thought of her mother back in Boston, who had instilled in her the courage to seek truth regardless of the personal cost. She thought of Rebecca Hartwell and the other young women who had died in pursuit of justice. She thought of the children who were still out there, waiting to be rescued from monsters who wore the faces of saints. The devil's harvest was over in Deadwood Junction. The trafficking network that had operated under the cover of religious charity had been exposed and destroyed. Father Miguel was dead, Dr. Thornfield was dead, and their buyers were facing federal prosecution. But Sarah knew that the war against those who preyed on the innocent was far from over. The network had tentacles reaching into every corner of the frontier, and there were other operations that needed to be exposed. As the train carried her toward Denver and whatever horrors awaited her there, Sarah McKenzie felt the weight of her mission settling on her shoulders. She was 20 years old, barely 5 feet tall, and looked young enough to be mistaken for a schoolgirl. But she was also the woman who had brought down a child trafficking ring, saved 15 children from slavery, and exposed a network of corruption that reached across the frontier. She was her mother's daughter, a crusader for justice and a seeker of truth who would not rest until every child was safe and every story was told. The train whistle echoed across the Montana landscape as they rounded a bend, and Sarah saw her reflection in the window, older now, harder, but still burning with the righteous fire her mother had kindled in her heart. Behind her, the lights of Deadwood Junction faded into memory. But the children she had saved would grow up free, their futures bright with possibility. Lucy Crawford would become a teacher. Little Wolf would become a leader of his people. And all of them would remember the young woman who had risked everything to give them back their lives, and that Sarah knew was worth any price she might have to pay. The battle for justice continued, one story at a time, one child at a time, one victory at a time. And Sarah McKenzie intended to fight that battle until her dying breath, carrying with her the memory of those who had fallen and the hope of those who still waited to be saved. The train carried her into the gathering darkness, toward new challenges and new victories, toward a future where the innocent would be protected and the guilty would face the consequences of their crimes. And in her heart, Sarah carried the unshakable conviction that truth, however dangerous, was always worth pursuing. The devil's harvest was over. The real work was just beginning.